Discovered my husband of 7 years was cheating with a young coworker. So I got revenge by sending proof to all their F&F, while blindsiding him with divorce papers, and getting him fired. I, 35F, have been married to my husband, 34M, for 7 years. We've never really had any problems beyond regular couple issues in our relationship, and we were able to establish a really strong foundation of trust by telling each other pretty much everything that is happening in our lives. If a guy comes up to me and asks for my number at the supermarket, I'd tell him. If a female friend is being really touchy with him, he'll let me know as soon as he gets home. This has been our arrangement for years, and it's worked great for both of us. The issue started when I was putting his clothes into the laundry and emptying out the pockets, as all of us should do, not just to prevent money or valuables from being ruined, but because this was what set the entire thing into motion for me. I found a receipt from a relatively fancy restaurant in our area, and based on what was ordered, it was clear that it was a dinner for two. My husband hadn't told me anything about this, so while my first instinct was suspicion, I felt that there must have been an explanation of some sort for it. I confronted him with what I had found, and he actually did have a pretty good explanation for it. My husband is a corporate guy, the kind of person who wears a suit to work every day. His job also calls pretty frequently for him to try and sugar up potential clients, so according to him, that receipt was from a client that he took to dinner to discuss things a bit further with. I asked him why he didn't tell me about it like he usually does, but he said it was simply because it slipped his mind by the time he got back home, and that the deal wasn't closed in the end. He didn't seem to have to think much before telling me all of this, so I believed it right away. The only gripe I had with him then was that we hadn't gone to that restaurant together, since we had been wanting to. Anyway, I trusted my husband, as I've said, so I never really thought anything else of what had happened. There really wasn't a reason to, just based on seeing a receipt. Things went back to normal pretty quickly after that, and we didn't have any issues with each other for quite a few months. However, things boiled up again between us about a month later when a friend of mine called me one evening and said that she bumped into my husband with a woman on his arm. She just happened to be in a part of the city that was a bit far off and spotted him across the road. I asked her if she was sure it was him, but she said she actually crossed the road and spoke to him. When he saw her, he let go of the woman but seemed to act normal beyond that. He didn't seem too flustered, she said. Her only regret was she didn't ask him what he was doing in that part of town, and they went their separate ways soon after. Right before they turned the corner, she saw the woman clasp onto his arm again. At this point, all the alarms in my head started to blare. I thought briefly about the receipt I had found in his pocket, but honestly, I didn't make too much of a connection because it still could have been a business dinner. But this on its own was enough for him to have a lot of explaining to do. As soon as he got back home, which was around 11 p.m., he could tell that something was off with my mood, and he asked me what was wrong right away. Considering my friend hadn't hidden herself, I think he already knew what it was about, but he waited for me to say it. When I told him and asked him to explain himself, he just chuckled and shook his head lightly. According to him, that woman was one of his coworkers and there was nothing going on between them. They had gone for a business dinner with some clients that the company was trying to get on board, so about 4 people from his company had attended with him. The female coworker that my friend saw had too much to drink, and that was why she was supporting herself on him. Here's the thing, I realized that my husband had time to think of a story because he knew my friend would have told me, but for some reason, I believed him. Maybe it was because I had always trusted him, or because I was in denial and I didn't want the mess that would come about from this being what I hoped it wasn't, but it was so easy for me to believe him, and that was what I chose to do. He even hugged me afterward, saying that he would have told my friend if she had asked so that I wouldn't have had to worry myself. He apologized for stressing me out and told me that I really had nothing to worry about. That he was mine and mine alone. At that point, all my suspicions dissolved. At this point, things went fine for about 6 months straight. No accounts of anyone seeing him traipsing around town with women, no stray and unexplained receipts in suit pockets. Things seemed normal, and I honestly didn't find myself dwelling on whether my husband was cheating on me or not. However, this peace of mind really only lasted that long, and it was after the third event that everything started to crumble. My husband came back home pretty late one night. It was nearly midnight, and he had texted me at some point during the night that he was doing the usual wining and dining for one of the clients that his company was trying to win over. Again, it wasn't the first time in the 6-month period, so I didn't think too much of it. He came back, a little tipsy, and it was when I went in to hug him that I smelt what was distinctly feminine perfume. I immediately asked him why he smelt like a woman's perfume, but I tell you that this man told me straight to my face that it was his usual perfume. He's been wearing the same Tom Ford fragrance to work for the last 2 years, so I don't think it is ridiculous for me to be able to tell when he smells like something different. I told him it was a different fragrance, but he only maintained that it was his usual scent, and he told me I was acting delusional, which was an out-of-character thing for him to say to me. He gently pushed past me and went upstairs. I think this was the first time that I really knew something was wrong. Because I started to feel like I was being gaslighted. It was then that the thing with the receipt and what my friend had seen came back to me, and suddenly, I was extremely suspicious. I was halfway up the stairs, wanting to confront him, but I actually realized that he would probably gaslight me again until I felt like I was losing my mind or being an emotional woman or something. I still went upstairs though, because I knew he was in the shower. He had undressed, with his clothes lying on the bed and his phone beside it. I had to smell his suit and his shirt again, because I needed to be sure I wasn't actually losing it, and sure enough, I was 100% certain that wasn't his Tom Ford perfume that I was smelling on it. At that point, I went straight into his phone. I went into the gallery app first, and right there were the pictures taken that night. It was him at some kind of lounge, with a young woman. She looked like she was 23 or something, cozied up to him. There was even a picture of them kissing while she held the phone for a selfie. I felt like I was going to explode. I took a video with my own phone, swiping through all the pictures. I was about to enter his messaging app, but I could hear him rounding up in the bathroom, so I let it go. Honestly, I wanted to confront him so badly, but I needed to know more because I felt like he'd find a stupid way to explain away the kiss and I might actually fall for it. I know, I hate how much I wanted to trust him. It didn't take long for him to fall asleep, so I grabbed his phone and jumped into the messaging app. The first 2 messages were people from work, but the last one was someone called Sabrina, and I hadn't heard anything about her before, so I assumed this was the mystery girl, and I was right. I went through the messages and I really can't tell you when tears started streaming down my face. He had told her he loved her, called me all sorts of names, they had reminisced about nights they had just had, there were nudes exchanged, and I don't know when I had gone far enough to see him sending pictures from the night that they had at the same restaurant I had seen the receipt of. I really hope that nobody here has to go through what I went through, because in that moment, I actually felt like there was nothing left for me. I felt absolutely broken. Some pretty dark thoughts went through my mind as I looked over at him sleeping. After 7 years of marriage. I know better now, but I remember thinking about how I do my best to look good, eat healthy, and go to the gym. I know for a fact that I look good for my age, but it destroyed my self-esteem thinking about some of the comments that he made about me and my body, and they both laughed about it. I think it was exactly that radicalized me and made me realize that I needed to make sure that this man hurt badly. I had to take videos of the entire chat, slowing down for the parts where he took her to restaurants, hotels, and shopping. He seemed to enjoy sending her pictures. I drank myself to sleep that night. In the morning, I tried to be my usual self so that he wouldn't suspect anything. I don't think I did a great job of it, but he didn't seem to notice much. He was a completely different person to me now. I am not shy to say that I resented him. Once he was out of the house, I knew that I had to find out who this woman was. I didn't know her last name, but when I searched for Sabrina in the list of my husband's friends on Facebook, there she was. It was the same face that I had seen kissing him, so I was sure it was her. The real shocker was me finding out that they worked at the same company, and going by her job title, she was likely one of his junior colleagues. At this point, I knew her name and I had evidence that they were doing things together, and I wanted to make sure that I hurt them both. Looking back, I think I became unhealthily obsessed with that idea, but ultimately, I was simply seeking closure and revenge in my own way, and I'm happy that I found what I was looking for. Honestly, that's all that really matters to me. The first thing that I did was get in contact with a divorce lawyer. Ironically, the same friend of mine who had seen my husband with who I assume was Sabrina, I eventually confirmed from my friend that it was her, had gotten divorced about 2 years earlier, and she was a big fan of her lawyer, so I hit her up, gave her a long update on everything that had happened since we last spoke, and she sent me the number of the lawyer. Right after we ended the call, I was talking to the lawyer to set up an appointment. It was about a few days later when I went to see the lawyer. I showed him all the evidence that I had and told him as much as I knew about my husband's affair. It was funny to me when he had the biggest smile on his face, because according to him, this is as sweet as a divorce case can get. He said that I had evidence of my husband's cheating, I had evidence of our marital funds that had been spent on his affair, with the shopping, restaurants, and fancy hotels, and I even had a potential issue with his workplace, considering the fact that his affair partner was a junior employee who might potentially be directly under his influence, though I wasn't too certain about this part. Either way, speaking to the lawyer actually had me feeling great. One thing I might not have mentioned earlier is that my husband always wanted me to be a housewife. He said his income was great enough for the both of us, and all he needed was for me to keep the home in order, especially ahead of us potentially having children. I have a lot of things that I volunteer for, so that's usually what takes up my time, but besides that, I've been his lovely obedient housewife all these years while he was cheating on me with who knows how many women. About 2 weeks after meeting with the divorce lawyer, my husband had to go on a business trip in another state. This isn't the first time he's had to do this, but it was definitely the first time that I felt like he was going to be sleeping with other women, or Sabrina. I had lost all trust for the man, and it was actually rather shocking that I had managed to stay in the house with him for as long as I had without going at his throat. It was after he told me he had landed that I decided to get things going. Now, I'm changing Sabrina's last name here. Let's say it's Muller. That's not a super common last name, so I assumed that everyone in her friends list on Facebook was a relative of hers. I composed a pretty long message talking about how Sabrina had been sleeping with my husband, knowing that he was a married man, and I even put some screenshots of the nastiest parts of their text conversations, minus the raunchy photos and videos, of course. I sent it to every single one of them and then put my phone on DND. A few hours later, some people had replied in shock and apologizing, some had cursed me out, and most had said nothing at all, but I wasn't doing any of this for their responses. My husband had also called me about 15 times, which means he knew I knew. To be honest, I hadn't really planned out what I was going to do at this point, but I hoped that he would have to go through with the business trip, continue to stew as I refused to pick his phone calls, and then when he got back, I'd serve him with the papers. While waiting for this to happen though, I made sure to pack as much of his stuff as possible into the suitcases that we had. I wasn't going to be thrown out of the house for being the faithful one. I also called over my brother, because I realized I didn't know my husband the way I thought I did, and honestly, I was fearful that he could come back in some kind of a rage, especially if I was to serve him with papers. So, my brother stayed over for the next 2 days, until my soon-to-be ex-husband came back from his business trip. As soon as he opened the door and saw me, he started cursing and shouting, calling me all sorts of names. Fortunately, my brother stepped between us and handed him the papers. He looked shocked for just about a second, but it seemed it didn't take long for it to sink in that was a logical progression of events. From behind my brother, I told him that I had packed his bags and he wasn't going to sleep in our house that night. That was the scariest that I had ever seen him look, but he couldn't do anything about it. Instead, he just stood there, fists clenched, and eventually took the divorce papers and his suitcases, and left. I didn't see him again until it was time for the divorce proceedings to start, and so that I won't bore you with the lengthy details, I'm glad to say that things went extremely well for me. It's hard to fight against such obvious evidence of infidelity. Plus, the judge didn't take kindly to the fact that he and his affair partner seemed very unremorseful about the entire thing. Our money being spent to fund his affair too? Another nail in the coffin. I got the house and a very handsome alimony arrangement since I basically did not work, so he'd need to be supporting me from wherever he was. Honestly, he could be with Sabrina for all I cared, but I felt like I had won. I didn't care who got a cheating man. It just hurt that I had loved him for so many years, and this is how things ultimately turned out. Now, the story is almost done, but I honestly had one final piece of my plan. Once the divorce was finalized, I wrote to his workplace about the allegations of a senior employee having a very inappropriate relationship with someone junior to him in the workplace. I sent all the evidence I had, once again, being sure to blur out the explicit content. I was not going to allow myself to be hit with some kind of revenge porn charge. It took a couple of days, but I got a response talking about how the situation was being investigated, as my claims were very serious, as Sabrina Muller was a direct subordinate to my ex-husband. About 2 weeks later, I got twofold confirmation that my ex-husband had lost his job. The first one was him calling me to curse me out and scream every expletive in the book, and the second one was an email from the company informing me that the investigation had been concluded and the necessary action had been taken against my ex-husband. Honestly, I think once I read that, it was like a sudden relief came over me. I think that was closure. I don't consider myself to be an evil or vindictive person, but I think that realizing that someone you loved and thought you could trust wholeheartedly had no issues cheating or gaslighting you is enough to change a person. All I'll say to the women out there is to beware. You can trust a man, but don't trust too deeply, because I learned that you can never truly know who someone is, 100%. Now on to the next story. Story 2. Tried to help my alcoholic wife after she lost her whole family. Instead, she cheated on me with her rehab coach and wanted to leave me, so I decided to take revenge. I was married to my wife for 4 years, but due to her alcohol problem, our marriage was rocky. Before my wife and I were married, I knew she had a thing for alcohol, but I didn't think it would become a problem in the future. She was the type of woman who loved to drink and party. The first time we met each other was at a club. The moment I saw her, I liked her instantly, and I approached her in her group of friends. She and her friends had come to the club to celebrate a birthday that night, and that was how we talked and spent the rest of the evening at the club together. After meeting each other for the first time that night, we went home together because she asked if she could come home with me, and on the first night, we got intimate. My wife said she thought I was one of those men who wanted to tap her honey pot, and that would be the end. But for me, it was different. I liked her so much, and getting intimate with her intensified my feelings for her. In the following weeks, we met at least twice a week, and after 3 months of spending time together, we started dating. By this time, she was freshly out of college and did one of those small pay hourly jobs until she could get the kind of job she wanted. As I mentioned earlier, I knew my wife had a drinking problem from the first few weeks we met, but I didn't think it would get to the point of seeking help from rehab. After a year and some months of dating, my wife and I married and officially moved in together. Unfortunately, a year after we got married, she lost her parents and only sibling in a ghastly motor accident, and this was when things got worse. Losing her parents and only sibling in one day took its mental toll on her, and she resorted to drinking to help her deal with the pain. When her drinking got extreme, I thought it would only be for the mourning period, but it wasn't. After the burial, months passed, and my wife did not get over her family's demise. She became a shadow of herself, and I tried to comfort her. I understood that she was in a very dark place mentally, but I tried my best to support her in every area she needed support. Unfortunately, around that same time, she got pregnant but miscarried the baby, which added to her agony. She also stopped working, and caring for us fell on me. On the days she wasn't drinking, She would be aggressive and get mad over things that didn't require such anger. Taunts walked in on her making out with one of my neighbors, and I was furious. She was high on alcohol, and he seemed sober. I kicked the neighbor out of my house and reported him to his wife, but I couldn't do anything to my wife because I believed she wasn't in her right senses. Well, I was wrong, because a couple of days later, I saw her talking to the same neighbor, and when she saw me coming, she walked away from him immediately. Meanwhile, by this time, her drinking got worse. If I gave her money, she would spend all of it on alcohol, and it got to the point where she couldn't go a day without drinking. I got so frustrated, and I was tired too. I was tired of tolerating her, paying the bills alone, and still caring for her. It was already choking me, and I decided to get her help. When I had no other option, I told her I was taking her to rehab, but she was hesitant to go until after a series of persuasion. For the first 3 months, she went to rehab. I noticed a significant improvement, and I was glad I was getting my wife back. As the concerned husband I was finally at peace that she had broken out of her bad habit and was finally getting her life together, but I was wrong. One day, I was at home enjoying some YouTube content on my phone when my wife came home to tell me that she was getting married to the love of her life. When she said this, I didn't pay much attention to her, and I just laughed it off, but when she mentioned her rehab coach's name, my ears raised, and I asked her to repeat what she said. According to my wife, her rehab coach, Ryan, was the one for her, and she told me they were in love with each other. She also said that she loved Ryan because he treated her like a queen, talked to her nicely, and blah blah, and they would get married. I was shocked when I heard that and knew she was going nuts. The Ryan she was talking about was already a married man with 2 kids, so it didn't make any sense. I was also sure she did not come up with the whole marriage thing on her own, so I was forced to confront Ryan on her next meeting day. When I told him everything my wife had said and how they were planning to get married, Ryan said she was delusional, and somehow, my wife heard all of his responses. She had been eavesdropping on our conversation, and the moment she heard him, she came out of her hiding place with her eyes filled with tears. She literally sobbed like a baby, and at the same time, she showed me a video of her and Ryan together in bed and in the bathroom naked. She had Ryan record the video of the last time they were together in a hotel, and he sent it to her. She even said Ryan promised to divorce his wife so they could get married. When she showed me the video, Ryan was so pissed, and he called her names for being dumb enough to believe that he would leave his wife to be with an unstable woman like her, and his words broke her heart. After losing her family, I had never seen my wife cry like that, and at that point, I understood that she loved Ryan as she claimed. She even planned to divorce me so she could be with Ryan, which was heartbreaking for me. I was so mad at Ryan for taking advantage of his client, my wife. And to give him a taste of his medicine, I pressed charges, using the video my wife showed me as evidence in court. Sharing this here is easy because the hurt and heartbreak I felt almost shattered me. Despite all the tough times my wife had given me, I still loved her, and I tried to get her help so that things could go back to normal, but she cheated on me in return and even planned to divorce me to be with her rehab coach. Anyways, I still felt pity for her because she was utterly heartbroken after she found out Ryan was using her, and she nearly fell into depression. Out of pity, I had to submit her to a mental hospital for more watchful care, and after she was admitted, I divorced her. Even though it seemed like she was not in her right state of mind, she was in the right state of mind to think of divorcing me. Honestly, our relationship was a serious waste of my time, resources, and emotions. But I'll consider it as one of the lessons of life. I'll give a piece of free advice. Some women are not worth all the sacrifices most men make. Even if you give them the universe, they will still have an excuse to cheat. As for Ryan, I won the court case, and he got a jail term for taking advantage of his mentally unstable client, and the government shut his business down. I often miss my wife, but I cannot use her problem as an excuse for her to break our marital vows and cheat on me.